Your name is?
Nadia Sol Ireri Unzueta Carrasco.
And where are you currently living?
I live in Hermosa, which is a neighborhood in Chicago on the near northwest side.
And where were you born?
I was born in Mexico, Distrito Federal.
And how old were you when you came here?
I was turning 7. I was 6 and when we first came here, and then we left, and then we came back and I had already turned 7.
Do you remember anything about the crossover here?
Well, we actually came on a tourist visa, so we came on a plane. I remember that I didn't want to come, but the first time we came was to see my dad. My dad got a job here in Chicago, and he was living in Little Village, which is actually where I was living for 18 years. And so from there, my mom and my sister and I were supposed to go back to Mexico, but my sister, I think, knew that if we went back to Mexico, my mom might not necessarily want to come back, so she decided to stay with my dad. And my mom and I returned over there, and we packed up our stuff, and we brought it back with us here. So I remember that kind of.
So is that why you mentioned something about not wanting to come here?
A little bit, yeah.
What was that about?
Well, I think that because I was the youngest member of my family, I was 7 at the time. I'm not sure that my parents took into consideration kind of explaining everything to me, or maybe they did and I didn't understand, or they thought I wouldn't understand. I don't remember that they did, or maybe their reasons didn't seem valid to me, right? So I dismissed them. I don't remember. I just know that I felt for a long time like I didn't make that choice, and it was a difficult sort of thing to do, but yeah.
So you've been here for a while. How do you define yourself today?
Lots of different ways. I think it depends on the context in which I am, right? For this context, I usually say that I'm someone who's undocumented. Often I define myself as someone who goes by, who tends to think of herself as a woman usually. I used to not think of myself as someone with a body to begin with, but it doesn't, I don't know, the gender thing. It's like, okay, it's all good. I definitely identify with growing up in Little Village, even though now I live somewhere else. I still identify with Little Village. I'm a vegetarian because I think that if I should be able to kill the things that I eat, or at least potentially, right? So I'm okay with killing vegetables. I don't do so well with small animals. So yeah.
How do you think your identity as an undocumented person is perceived by others, whether it's at school or at work, in the media, political rhetoric?
I mean, I think it differs. I think that when I started telling people that I was undocumented, and I was in high school, but I'm not really sure that, one, I knew what that meant. I mean, I knew what it meant, but I didn't have necessary feelings about it yet. And so I'm not sure that I could adequately explain to my friends what that meant for me. And lately, we're still in touch, me and some of my school friends, and so it's clear to me now that they didn't understand what I said, or maybe that they did, but in a different context. So I think that's for friends. I don't know. I can keep talking about other stuff, but you seem ready to move on. So
no, I was just going to say, what about at work or even in the media?
Yeah, so at work, I work, I'm a freelance grant writer, so I'm not necessarily employed, right? I get certain grants and then I do them, and then that works. And my work knows that I'm undocumented. I work for an organization that does work around workers' rights, and my dad is actually one of the people that works there, so they know me. They've known me for a while. And but when I first started to work, everybody that I've worked with actually has pretty much known that I'm undocumented. Maybe not because we've done some partnerships with other organizations in the work that I do, and maybe those other organizations didn't know, but the ones that I was in touch with definitely knew and tried to be super, super helpful.
What do you hope will be gained by increasing both your visibility or the visibility of the community at large?
Well, I think for me, coming out has a couple of different benefits and reasons behind it. One of them is because when I was growing up, I didn't know that there was such a big community of people that had grown up undocumented as well. I had a lot of friends who were immigrants, a lot of them who also didn't have their papers, but most of them had come here when they were older, 21, 18, 36, right? And so it's a completely different experience. And I didn't have anybody other than my sister to really think about how growing up without documents has affected our lives. And so now that I have found that community, it's kind of that thing where I want to tell everybody that it exists and that we're here and that they shouldn't feel alone, and that, like, you know, that it's not necessarily that it's going to be okay, but like that we're going to work to try to make it, to try to change things. So, yeah.
What are some of the ways in which the visibility of the undocumented community is increasing? And who do you think is behind this and why?
Well, I think that for the most, so I guess a two-part answer. One is, it has definitely been increasing, and I think a lot of it has been the work that undocumented people have done, right? Because we've been coming out and telling our own stories, and we've been doing civil disobediences and public rallies and events like this, and so I think people are hearing more about it. And we've also been able to get some attention from the media, as well as build our own media. So the organization that I work with, for example, like, we have a very, we use a lot of different social media, like Facebook, Twitter, all that type of stuff, right? And that really helps to connect us to other people that are undocumented, and also to just get the word out about what's happening. The other thing is, I think because immigration is being used in such a highly politicized way, right, to try to sort of divide people, and particularly by politicians, and like, oh, give me your votes because this is my stance, blah, blah, blah. I think that has created a space where I feel like I need to respond, and I feel like I need to make sure that other people that are immigrants, that other people that are undocumented have spaces to respond as well. So I think for me, it's been like, one, it's definitely us and our stories, and two, it's kind of like the climate in which we're in. I feel like if maybe a couple of years ago we had said, like, we're undocumented, I don't know if people would have necessarily cared as much.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about, you know, some of the rhetoric around being undocumented or coming out as undocumented. What do you think are some of the risks of doing that, or what do you think is lost by that increased visibility?
Sometimes friendships. Depends on, I guess, your friends and how willing they are to work with you and stuff. I think maybe the things that get lost isn't so much about being undocumented. Well, okay, hold on. Okay, there's definitely risks, right? And I think that looks very different from each and every person. For me, one of them has been that I don't know if people would be willing to take the risks to hire me necessarily, because I'm very open about being undocumented, and technically, like, you're not supposed to hire people without work permits. And I feel like that's kind of an impediment, and it's been one of the biggest frustrations in the work that I do. Is there are some amazing organizations that are like, okay, you know, we are going to hire people that are undocumented because they, like, qualify for a job and whatever, and there are organizations that say, like, I can't hire you because you're being too public. So that's definitely been one of the risks. When I was mentioning earlier about friends, is sometimes, like, now that I've been able to talk about being undocumented openly, I've also been able to talk about a lot of my frustrations. And I think it can be difficult for people to hear what those are, particularly if they're not coming from the same experience. And so there's been different reactions from different friends, most of them very, very positive, actually. And some of them kind of like wanting to know more and understand more, right? Because we're friends and they want to be supportive, which is amazing. So that's good, but yeah.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to my next question. You know, why do you think it's important to share your identity as an undocumented person?
Well, I think it's important for me to be able to bring my whole self to whatever it is that I'm doing, whether it's a collaboration or like a friendship, a partnership, anything like that. It's important for me to be able to bring completely who I am and also what affects me, right? And so thinking about being undocumented has been a big, big part of my identity, even though sometimes I feel weird about it because technically it's a status, right? It's technically not an identity, and if like the laws were to change magically or something, like I'd stop being undocumented and then I'd be like, oh, so what's my identity now? So I think in one way, it's very important for me to bring that aspect of myself into it, and in another way, I feel like sometimes I get stuck in it, and it's hard for me to remember that there's more to me than just that. And so it's kind of like what do they say, like a sword with two sharp edges. Double-edged sword. Double-edged sword, that's the word I'm looking for. So it's definitely been interesting to come out really publicly and to think about like how that affects my own psychology, as well as like as much as it's liberating, it also makes me focus a lot more on it, and then like I lose out on other things.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So what's your name?
My name is Daniel Garcia.
Okay, thanks for participating. Where are you currently living?
I am living in Albany Park, but I grew up mostly in Miami, Florida. I came to Chicago for school.
Okay. Where were you born?
I was born in Medellin, Colombia.
How long have you been here?
I've been in the United States since I was 8 years of age. That would be 18 years, around, 16 years, I mean.
Do you remember anything about coming here or from that time period?
Yeah, I do remember. Basically, they told me we were coming for vacation and we were going to Disney World. So I finally managed to go to Disney World 4 years later, so my parents kept that end of the promise.
That's one way to do it. How do you define yourself?
I decide myself as undocumented, as just another human being, I suppose.
Right. Now you say you define yourself as undocumented, and I know that's a loaded term.
Yeah.
How do you think your identity as undocumented is perceived by others, like, for instance, at work or school, even in the media?
That's the question to ask. I do know that I didn't always identify myself as undocumented publicly. It was not until maybe around a year ago that I started to reach out to people and to start sharing my story. Before then, my response would have been that for safety reasons, I just kept stayed in the shadows, kept quiet, because I felt it was going to be safer. But now that I've started to share my story, started to talk about my status, I've realized that if you don't say that you're undocumented, you really don't get the help that you actually need and require. And this is particularly true if you're trying to get into college and you're trying to maintain in college. I find that, for example, in school, counselors will lend you a hand, but if they don't know you're undocumented, they might give you resources that you have to deny. And they may know of resources that are available for undocumented students, which they don't share with anybody else. And so in identifying myself as undocumented, I not only give a face to the fact that this is what an undocumented person is, and eliminate many of the perceptions that have been floating around regarding what is an undocumented person. But I also I'm able to find more resources, able to find more people that are able to help me, and I'm able to, through my activism, through my being active, and not just in this undocumented movement, but also in what actually inspires me. I'm very much involved with sustainability and renewable technologies, and I've been interested in getting into that kind of research. So by identifying myself as undocumented and also demonstrating that I'm interested in those areas, I'm able to show that I'm not just an undocumented youth, just being undocumented, but I'm also interested in other stuff, and I am more like anybody else that's going to college and aspires to greater things in life.
So I hear that being visible and increasing visibility for you was something that was motivated by this desire to have more resources, but it's also about a personal kind of thing, right? Like being out for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the reasons that I've come out was because I felt like I was in a corner. Either I didn't know if I could get into college, and I felt cornered when I was approached by the high school counselor asking students, where are you going to college? And then I had to basically out myself to that person, realize that there were possibilities to go to college that I didn't think about before. Or when I started coming out a year ago, when tuition was getting too high, and I was feeling like I was not going anywhere, but then I was getting into this considerable amount of debt with the education that I didn't know if it was going to be useful. So that's how pretty much I started sharing my status.
So obviously there are important aspects of sharing your identity. Do you think that is there anything to be gained by withholding your identity? Are there risks, or how would you rate the two?
I found that the gains from sharing my identity are far greater than the risk that I was worried about. Of course, the concern was if I share my status, is somebody gonna turn me into ICE, or what kind of risk is my family gonna face by sharing my status? But being a student from Florida and being in Chicago, Illinois, I'm able to observe that the situation, at least in Chicago, is very, very different than the situation in Florida. And to the extent that sharing my story in Chicago feels a lot safer. It feels a lot more comfortable. And I still go to Miami, and I still realize that the situation over there is very different.
How so?
For example, I felt like I couldn't go out when I go back to Miami, especially during the holidays, because you start seeing on the news that police are doing drunk checks all over the city, and what it really does is actually catches a lot of people that are undocumented in those drunk checks. So it forced me and my family to basically stay indoors during the holidays, and so it made holidays especially stressful because we couldn't go out anywhere. And then since I'm from Miami, Florida, and the biggest community in Miami is the Cuban community, there's also what I have observed is some animosity between the Cuban community and the immigrant community from other countries. And so I've seen, particular one time when I was working in a gas station, there was a heated debate between two people from the Cuban community regarding actually the announcement that Obama made last year on prosecutorial discretion, and one was against this announcement, and the other one was for the announcement. I never seen that before, and so it just caused me to realize that the circumstances here are very, very different than the circumstances over there.
You think that's attributable to some of the activism that is here, or what exactly about Chicago?
I do feel like the activism that is in Chicago, particularly what has been created through the Coming Out of the Shadows events, or the Shattered Outs that Angel has organized, and doing it publicly and putting a face to the undocumented movement, has had a very significant and positive effect on this, on ensuring that people are aware who's actually an undocumented person, and that I haven't seen so much visibility of that in Miami, Florida.
That's good to know. And what do you think is the most pressing issue faced by the undocumented today, whether in Chicago or Miami or across the country?
The most pressing issue is the fact that there are people that are this debate on the SB 1070 is the most pressing issue that is faced by undocumented immigrants right now, because it's trying to determine who's an undocumented person, and I feel like that has very much parallel lines to the Jim Crow laws, whereby they instill this sort of a racial and bias onto what an undocumented person is. And it puts people into stereotypes, into what they believe they're going to act, or how do you identify somebody who's undocumented, or how they dress, how they talk, how they act around other people. But what people fail to realize is that pretty much everyone in the United States is undocumented except for the Native Americans, and they're not really involved in any part of this discussion. So it's a very much present issue that is going to be affecting the Latino community, the Asian community, and anyone else, but in particularly whoever becomes the target of the stereotypes, and that's looking like it's going to be the Latino community.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for your time.
No,
is there anything else that you have to add?
The complexity of immigration is very extreme. Something that I realized is that nobody's story is exactly the same. In particular, my story is I am pretty much the only undocumented immigrant in my entire family. My parents are permanent residents, my sister's a U.S. citizen, and I'm observing that through my activism online in particular is that a lot more people are falling into this category where they're basically aging out of any kind of relief, even though they've been in the United States since they were children, and they've grown in the United States. They've gone through the same schools everyone else has. I'm also observing that as people go from high school to college, they start getting hit with this realization that, I mean, at least in high school, you were sort of protected, and you were sort of able to move around, able to go to school without worrying about what's going to happen. But once you get into college, you start realizing all these obstacles that start appearing. Then you're not able to work, and you have to pay for college somehow, and that is, I feel, affecting the mentality of some of the people that are going through college and how they perceive themselves.
That's a good point. I was going to ask, how do you think that realization of your status and the limitations of that, how do you think that kind of plays into the psyche of people as they get older? You know, is it negative, or is there like some sort of
It's going to
anxiety?
be, I feel like it's negative for some people. It can also be positive for other people. So it depends on how somebody is able to adapt to their status. And I've realized some amazing individuals have come out of this, and this they learn skills by sort of surviving through this really muck and all this all of this stuff that is happening. And if they're lucky enough, they find the right kind of people that are able to help them and able to hone their skills, and they come out of this as strong individuals, as somebody that is very independent and able to really go against the current and aspire to great things. But then there are the other people that observe all these limitations, and I mean, they don't have the same fortune. They're not as fortunate enough to find the same individuals that are able to help them, or find that there are organizations around them that are able to help them, and they end up through no fault of their own giving up, and really that's a great loss. It's a loss of opportunity, and then they feel defeated. I'm realizing through my activism online is that particular people in other states, they're now starting to self-identify as illegal immigrants instead of undocumented immigrants or illegal aliens, and that's really giving them this mentality that they're a criminal, that there's something wrong with them. And I mean, I'm extraordinarily fortunate to actually be in Chicago, Illinois, and not in Georgia or not in Miami, Florida. Because the situation over here is very, very dramatically different, and I'm able to have these extraordinary resources that are around me, organizations around me that are giving a face to the who is actually an undocumented immigrant, and that doesn't really exist in many other places. I've talked to people from Georgia who tell me nothing like sitting around and sharing their stories would never happen in Georgia, and to me that now seems a little bit alien, because now I'm part of those movements. I'm part of those people that are screaming out and saying I'm undocumented, unafraid, and unapologetic. I went to D.C. and I screamed as loud as I could, but that doesn't really happen in most other states.
Well, we're glad to have you here in Chicago. So thank you for your participation and your contributions.
Oh, thank you for this opportunity to speak out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you state your name, please?
My name is Andrea Rosales.
And where are you currently living?
I live in the north side of Chicago, northwest side.
And where were you born?
I was born in Mexico, Guanajuato.
That's where my dad's from.
Yeah.
How old were you when you came here?
I was 5 years old when I came here.
Do you happen to remember anything about that experience? Were you with your family, or?
Yeah, well, my dad had come about a year before us, and so I came with my mom and my older brother, and I remember my mom always like having to worry about trying to get us visas, but the process was really difficult, and so in the end we crossed and without visas, and I don't have many memories of the actual journey, but I do remember being separated from my mom and my brother for like long periods of times, and relying a lot on strangers to kind of just figure out and navigate, but like not really having to say a word in order to just cross safely and hope that my mom is on the other side.
So this was when you said you crossed when you were 5, and now you've been here pretty much your whole life, right?
Yeah.
How do you define yourself today?
Today, I define myself as an undocumented Latina woman of color. Currently trying to find the difficult process of living freely and radically.
Yeah. How do you think your identity is perceived by others, whether that's at work or school, at home, in the media?
There are definitely a lot of misconceptions out there, and the media does a lot to perpetuate a lot of discrimination and misconceptions that do occur out there. I remember at school, I'm no longer in school, but when I was in school, a lot of my friends who I became close to over the years, they really didn't know until I came out publicly about my status and I started sharing my story. And I remember a lot of them saying, you know, like, if it wasn't really for you sharing your story and speaking out, I would have never really cared about this issue, or like would have just like grazed by it. And so I think that it definitely had a lot of impact in my relationships at school. And unfortunately, I've definitely had to let go of certain friendships because I've had friends that just would not understand and would not even care to understand. And it was very difficult to remain in a friendship with somebody who really didn't give a crap about your experience and your thoughts and your opinions. So.
Yeah, I'm listening to you talk about, what is lost. Sometimes there's relationships that are lost, but there's also gains that come from increasing your visibility, like you mentioned, having other people interested in these things. Why do you think it's important to share your identity?
I think it's very important to share who you are and your identity because it's just who you are, right? Like, you can't really, like, hide a part of something that you are or something that, is so much a part of you. And I think it's very important in order for people to just accept you for who you are and what experience you go through, right? Because it's very difficult to not speak from your own experiences.
What do you rely on or expect from your community?
I think that I definitely expect my community to kind of always really challenge me in a lot of ways. As being like so-called part of the movement and being undocumented, a lot of people believe that like I speak for the entire undocumented immigrant community, which is not true. We all have very different issues. We all have very different concerns. And so in that sense, I feel like I'm always being challenged, right, to always recognize my own privilege, but also recognize the needs of of the community around me.
What do you think of the work that is being done by those people who are advancing the cause of the undocumented today?
Well, I think it's very, very important, especially given the time that we're living in. It's very, right, there are some states that are very, very anti-immigrant, and so I definitely look up to them where if they're living in a state, right, that's not like Chicago where it's relatively friendly. So, I mean, I think, yeah, I definitely look up to them, and I think that it's very important that we all share our experiences and our struggles with one another.
And what do you think is the most pressing issue of the community today? I know there's a lot, but what do you think is the one, like, big issue?
There's definitely a lot of issues. I think I think one big one, right, is the fact that there are so many individuals being deported, and the government is really like not owning up to their actions and their words, right? Like the administration, the Obama administration, right? Like we have heard that the Obama administration has deported more individuals than any other president, and has set a quota of like 400,000 a year. And so, like when you hear that kind of things, it's very horrifying, right? And it's very, and I think that, you know, a lot of times we tend to support undocumented individuals who have, you know, a clean record and who are like the straight A, like poster child of the DREAM Act. But the reality is that there are a lot of individuals who may or may not make mistakes and are caught within this like net of just like criminalizing individuals for who they are. And so I think that, you know, that's definitely a very pressing issue, and I think that it's very important that we just support one another no matter what the situation or circumstances.
Great. I'd like to thank you for your participation. Before we close, is there anything that you'd like to add about the I Define Myself program or exhibit? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Your name is?
Rigo Padilla.
And where were you born?
I was born in Mexico, raised in the U.S.
How old were you when you came here?
When I came to the U.S., I was 6 years old and moved directly to Chicago, so I've been here for 18 years.
Do you remember anything about your experience coming over?
Yeah, I remember the whole journey. Actually, I remember flying to Tijuana and making the scary but exciting journey to the U.S. Growing up, everyone talks about the U.S. as this great, exciting place. So I was carrying that with me when I crossed through Tijuana.
Were you with your family?
Yeah, all of my family was with us when we came to the U.S.
So you've been here for about 18 years. How do you define yourself?
I think it's always changing how anyone, especially I, define myself. I think for the past few years I've been defining myself around my undocumented status, so undocumented, unafraid, unapologetic, and I think although there's a resonance in all those three words, I think we all kind of found a way to make them special to ourselves.
And how do you think your identity is perceived by others, whether that's at work, school, the media, political rhetoric?
I think it's changed over time. I think at first, I think organizing, we realized the power in sharing our story, and we realized that we could use our story as a political tool, but also as a tool to connect with people. So I think over the years, as I've come out to my friends, to my coworkers, to my classmates through various forms, they've all realized that the immigration issue is much more complicated because I'm still undocumented. They know who I am. They know I'm hardworking. They know I'm doing well in school. So all these things help to challenge what an undocumented person is. So I think it's benefited me personally, but also my circles to realize that the issue is more complicated, and that whatever they're seeing in the media is not necessarily true.
Yeah, you sort of touched on this next question with your previous answer, but what do you hope will be gained by increasing visibility of your identity? You talked a little bit about that personally, but what about in terms of the community, broader community?
I mean, obviously, there's always going to be people that just because you're undocumented, you're never ever going to change their stance or their position on an issue, like especially like immigration. But I think for the larger American population, I think it is sharing your story. It's putting a face to the issue that helps, like I said before, challenge those perceptions of what an undocumented person is, and they begin to try to understand that the immigration issue is much more complicated, and that working together and that addressing the issue puts us in a path towards fixing the immigration system. And with that said, I think the more people come out, the more people realize that the immigration issue is much more diverse. So people from all circles of life, whether it's labor, whether it's based on your your ethnic background or your religion. When you come out, you get those people interacting, creating dialogue, and asking questions, and possibly leading to creating solutions.
Do you think that there's anything lost about this increased visibility? You know, identity is highly contextual. Are there certain circles where maybe it's, you know, there's different challenges being undocumented?
Yeah, I mean, on an individual basis, it took an adjustment of when you make yourself really, really, really visible. Obviously, you run into some obstacles, whether it's around employment, whether it's around access to resources, but you begin to address those when you find a space and a support network that can help you with that. But with that said, I think some obstacles are I think when you tie your organizing or strictly around identity, I think sometimes what is lost is like connections to the larger story, the larger issues. But I think you could also always turn that around and say that immigration is part of labor, immigration is part of this, or immigration is part of that. So it's not forgetting that, and it's making those connections, and not just just having your story be strictly about your personal story, but also saying that your personal story is tied to larger issues.
Now, you talked a bit about being open and some of the community involvement and benefits that come from that. What do you think is the most important reason to share your identity?
Yeah, I think this sounds crazy when I tell people, but I always say that you're safer when you come out. You're safer when people know about your undocumented status. So for me, it wasn't until I came out that I gained a support system that if I was ever in deportation, I had a group that would fight to stop my deportation. It was through coming out that I was able to find money for school. It was through coming out that I found an emotional and find an emotional support system that I can now go back to. So I think it's hard to say that to someone for the first time, and when they're hearing it, they say, "What do you mean? It's crazy," because all our lives we've been told, that you shouldn't reveal your status, that you should live in the shadows. But I think through coming out, you encourage others to do the same, and to find their own support networks and to create their own support systems. And in doing so, people begin to support you. Yes, you'll find some opposition, but I think overall you gain support and you actually are safer.
What do you think about the work that is being done today to advance the cause of undocumented students, people, workers?
I think what you've seen, not just in Chicago, but around the country, is that undocumented youth have put literally everything on the line, whether it's their lives, whether it's like their ability to proceed to obtain a higher education, or whether it's like putting relationships or work or money on the line to organize, to try to pass something like the DREAM Act, to pass something like comprehensive immigration reform. But I don't think that, although there's small pockets, I don't think that the larger, even immigrant rights community has taken that risk, has invested their resources to the undocumented community overall, and specifically to undocumented youth. So I think moving forward, there should be an extra emphasis in empowering and enabling undocumented communities and youth, because doing so is going to lead to change. So straying away from investing money in other things and just literally investing your money and time on empowering undocumented people.
You mentioned that this is largely driven by undocumented youth. Do you think there's something in particular about youth that lends itself well to kind of picking up this cause?
I think there's a lot of reasons why you're seeing this. It used to be that because we're undocumented youth, we were perceived in a more sympathetic light, so we were able to take certain risks that our parents couldn't. So, and the reality is that if we came out, we always could go back to our parents as a support network if we were fired from our jobs, or if we were at risk of being like kicked out of where we live because we revealed our status. And for our parents, it was more difficult, because if they came out and they were fired, you had a whole family that you had to answer to. But more and more, you're seeing even parents coming out, sharing their status and saying, I'm willing to take that risk. And more people saying, I support your decision as an employer, as someone that knows you, and we'll work to fix this. So I think we're obviously in a much more privileged position, but that doesn't mean that you're not seeing our parents also coming out.
What do you think is the most pressing issue faced by undocumented, whether youth or just across the generations in our country today?
I think it would be. It's hard to say, that citizenship would fix everything, because it wouldn't, because you're seeing people like communities like the Puerto Rican community that has the highest index number of poverty rates and unemployment, and just Latinos across generations that are being profiled just because they look undocumented. So I don't think that it would fix everything, but I think it's largely tied to our undocumented status and the path towards legalization. But with that said, I think we're lately, now that when we felt that nothing could pass federally, we started focusing on our own communities at the local level. So we started passing things like the Cook County Ordinance that meant that you wouldn't be put into proceedings, passing like the Illinois Dream Act that would help you obtain or gain access to higher education through financial resources and through the right information. So I think those little things are ways to improve the quality of life of undocumented people, and get you closer to living in a community, in a space where it's safer and it gives you the opportunity to succeed. But there's always that underlying problem of, because you're undocumented, you won't have the ability to gain access to certain things.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your participation. Before I let you go, do you have anything you'd like to add about either the I Define Myself program or anything else related to these topics?
Yeah, I think we came up with the concept of I Define Myself because we always felt that there was always someone else trying to define us, whether it was politicians saying that, this is what an undocumented person is, or speaking for us. So we felt that it was necessary for us to say that we have a story, we have a voice, and we choose to define ourselves.
Well, thank you very much. Your name is?
Linda Lopez.
And where are you currently living?
I live on the north side of Chicago, near Logan Square.
And where were you born?
I was born in West Humboldt Park.
So what is your experience in terms of, relating to the undocumented movement?
The issue used to be sort of obscure to me. It wasn't until my senior year of high school, where I had friends in my class applying to college, that I started to become more aware of the issue. The term undocumented, it came into my vocabulary because my friends were telling me that they were having trouble finding scholarships because they were undocumented, and I didn't fully understand what that meant. So I felt like I wasn't empathizing exactly with their struggle. And so I started college in the fall of 2010 at the University of Chicago, and I joined an organization called the U Chicago Coalition for Immigrant Rights, sort of as a way to educate myself, because I acknowledged that I was very ignorant about the issue, but I knew that it was because it was becoming a very prominent issue in the United States, and I really wanted to understand why. I became involved with that, and we started attending a lot of Immigrant Youth Justice League events, or I started to meet a lot of the members. So I felt like I became more aware about what this issue exactly represented. It was no longer an issue. It was no longer a faceless issue. I feel like when you finally tie it to an actual human beings, it becomes more tangible.
And what do you hope will be gained by increasing the visibility of the undocumented, both personally and in general?
I think it's definitely helping, aside from just helping bring awareness to this issue and helping to bring change. I think it also helps spur a lot of involvement among a lot of other people that might not be undocumented, and I think it helps push a lot of issues that are important to the Hispanic community in general, aside from just the immigration movement. At least I feel like that's something that I've seen.
So you were born here, correct?
Yeah, I was born here.
So your motivation for getting involved with the movement, was there any kind of familial or personal motivation there? Was it just like a general kind of community?
Yeah, I've always had trouble answering that question, especially like with my mom. She says, "Oh, you're not undocumented. Why are you involved?" Like, it's their issue. And it's kind of been hard for me to explain why I'm involved. But I feel some of my family members are undocumented, but they're not students. So I think sort of hearing their struggle, even though it might be a little bit unrelated to like exactly for the push for the DREAM Act, I think it's still sort of tied into this larger movement for comprehensive immigration reform. So I think that after sort of asking myself those questions, I think it's sort of tied to maybe like hearing like at least some of my more separated family members go through that struggle.
Yeah, you mentioned something about your mother saying why that's their struggle. You know, why are you picking that up? So there's definitely perceptions about what it means to be undocumented or to belong to the movement. How do you think those perceptions reflect reality, or how would you like those to change?
Perceptions of undocumented
people.
Like how people perceive them in the public.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're really not that different from anyone else except for their status. So I think if more of the public were to understand that, I think that would be a really positive change. And I guess it's for me, I understand that, but I know that a lot of other people are ignorant about that.
What do you think about a lot of this work that's being done? I know you're also involved in it. There have always been undocumented people, right, in the United States and any country. What do you think about the movement today, and do you think, unique and from any other kind of periods?
I think it's very unique. Obviously, like, I'm only 20 years old, so I haven't seen a lot of huge movements.
Right. Just historically, I guess.
Yeah, historically, maybe the civil rights movement, I've heard about it, but I've never seen this many people get involved and so passionately about something. And I personally enjoyed how many Hispanics have. I know it's not only a Hispanic issue, but since I am Mexican, it's always, I don't know, it's positive for me to see a lot of like people of my background standing up and fighting for something they believe in. I don't know, so I think just based on my lifetime, I think it's something unique that we haven't seen this many people like uniting for a common goal.
And what do you think is the most pressing issue facing the undocumented right now?
The most pressing issue.
I know there are a lot. It's an unfair question, and I'll give you that.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe each of them would have a different perception of their, because I'm sure that maybe their individual issue of just not having citizenship and having a lot of different obstacles because of that seems like such a huge issue for, I think that's, yeah, off the top of my head, I think.
Okay, your name is?
Well, my name is Jose Martinez, or Jose Alberto Martinez.
And where are you currently living?
I'm currently living on near the Pilsen and Little Village area, right about there.
Oh, where were you born?
I was born in El Distrito Federal de Mexico, or Mexico City.
How old were you when you first came to Chicago or to the United States?
I was 6, and then shortly after, in December, I turned 7.
Do you remember anything about that experience?
Yeah, a little. Do you mean like a journey here, or like just memories of like first being here in the U.S.?
Both, either.
Well, one of my first memories was, we took buses to reach the frontier. We crossed on a bridge. I think maybe, I remember crossing a bridge with my parents. My mom it was my mom, because my dad was already here in the U.S. My mom was a little nervous, but I just kind of tried, just not really. Yeah, well, I was like 6, so.
Yeah, you're a child.
Yeah.
So you've been living here since then, right?
Yes.
How do you define yourself today?
As an undocumented person, or just in general?
In general.
Well, I think I just would define myself as a reader. I like teaching myself things. Like currently I'm teaching myself, for a while I've been teaching myself how to use the camera better. At first doing prints at home, then I'm moving on to a digital SLR camera. and teaching myself guitar or just reading books.
So, in terms of your undocumented status, how do you think that identity is perceived by others? You know, I know you perceive of yourself as, and everybody does, as a whole person doing things and
Yeah.
you know, but when it comes down to it, a lot of people will perceive your status as your identity. How do you think they perceive that, whether at work or school or?
Well, I think that's interesting because a lot of times I feel like I've done events where I've come out as undocumented, and there are spaces where I've told others about my status. But at the same time, I haven't really told that many people, like from my old high school. Like a couple know, some old teachers know, but not everyone, and no one at my current work job knows. But
what do you think is gained or lost by being out about your undocumented status?
well, having comfortable space, even if it's not a public space, just where others maybe like you or just supportive of you, like just being able to say it, it kind of feels like a weight is lifted. Like you don't realize it, but like once you do, it just feels good.
Do you think there's ever anything lost about coming out? You know, I guess any negative risks.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always the worry, and this is why I haven't really come out to people at my current job. Well, I think like only one person knows, but she's a close friend that I knew before that. Well, the risk that you feel is it's like, well, if my employer knows, will they fire me? And sometimes some employers kind of know, but it's like sort of like an open silent thing. Like they know, but like I mean, they don't formally know. Like if you say it openly, then maybe you fear that you might face some problems.
Why do you think it's important to share your identity, even despite those risks?
Well, I mean, a lot of times people have this random idea of what an undocumented person looks like. They don't realize that an undocumented person could look like me, just a student, like a friend of their kids, or I mean, yeah, I mean, they just put like this. If you don't have a person or a face to an issue or a label, then it's really easy to toss that person away or not consider them as much.
On that, what do you think about the work that's being done to advance the cause of the undocumented, to say to other people, hey, these people are everyday people? What do you think about some of the work that's being done?
Well, I mean, anything specific or?
Just the increase of it. This is something that some people claim is new. There's always been a lot of undocumented people in the United States, but there seems to be an increase of visibility.
I think people coming out and showing like who they are, and the American public then seeing a specific face to these people, I think that's a good step.
What would you like to be the ultimate goal of that kind of visibility?
People being able to relate maybe to what being undocumented is, and like that these are people, and that these laws can be changed, and they're not like, well, I don't know, for some reason people just call these people illegal or something, and then like put them in this category, and they can't really relate to them, I feel like.
Yeah, I think because of that lack of being able to relate, there's a lot of problems.
Or understanding that people in the community that they know might be undocumented. And
what do you think is the most pressing issue faced by the undocumented in the country? Just the biggest. I know there's a lot of issues, but what would you say is one of the bigger ones?
Well, as a student, or
from your experience, or whether you think like as a community-wide thing, either or.
Well, student-wise, I feel like a lot of times you don't really know like what resources you do have, if there are any, if you're undocumented, and a lot of the times it's very unclear or very hard to find scholarships. And when I was like in high school, I found it frustrating when I applied to college. Like my principal said, like, don't worry about the price. You could like get un préstamo, a loan, or to go to college or whatever. But that wasn't realistic because, well, one of the colleges that I got accepted to, the tuition was like over $30,000 per year, and like putting that burden on my family, and then with my sister going to college the very next year, it didn't really seem feasible. And I mean, I asked in some banks, but it's really not as easy as some people think sometimes.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thanks.